It was Friday, October 27, 1989, when Amy Mihaljevic, a 10-year-old girl, mysteriously disappeared in Bay Village, Ohio, United States. That morning, Amy left for school as usual. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but at the end of the school day, around 2 o'clock p.m., she left with a purpose no one could have imagined: to meet a man who had called her a few days earlier. This mysterious man claimed to know Amy's mother, Margaret Mihaljevic, and said he wanted the girl's help to buy a secret gift for her mom as a way to thank her for her supposed promotion at work. Innocent and excited by the idea, Amy kept the plan a secret, a detail that would become central to the investigation. The meeting was arranged at the Bay Square Shopping Center, just a few blocks from the school. Witnesses reported seeing Amy around 2:30 p.m. near the parking lot, talking to a fair-skinned man between 30 and 40 years old, with brown hair and an ordinary appearance. She seemed calm, showing no signs of distress. Shortly afterward, Amy was seen walking with the man, and then she was never seen alive again. The family only realized she was missing later that afternoon when Margaret came home from work and found that her daughter wasn't there. She immediately called the police. That's how one of the most haunting and heartbreaking cases in the United States began. The entire town mobilized. Posters were put up. Search teams began working tirelessly. What caught the police's attention from the very beginning was the fact that other girls from the same area had also received similar phone calls from a man who claimed to know their mothers and made similar invitations. These girls, however, either declined or told their parents. Amy didn't. The FBI quickly got involved in the case. Investigators believed the abductor had obtained information about Amy and the other girls through a visitor logbook at the Lake Erie Nature and Science Center, which Amy had signed weeks earlier. But the question remained, who was this man? How was he able to manipulate a child so calmly? And why Amy? Once Amy's disappearance was confirmed, the search for answers began with desperate urgency. Rescue teams, tracking dogs and volunteers combed the Bay Village area for days. Nothing. No signs. Amy's image began to appear on local news and soon all over the country. Her smiling photo, with long blonde hair and bright eyes, would become one of the most recognized faces of the 1990s among missing children cases. Police focused their efforts on the phone call the mysterious man had made to Amy. The investigation revealed that the call had been made directly to her home, and the caller knew specific details about her mother's life. This raised suspicions that he might be someone close to the family, or at least someone with access to personal information. But how? This is where a crucial piece of information emerges. Weeks before she disappeared, Amy had visited the Lake Erie Nature and Science Center, where she signed a guest book, writing down her name, address, and phone number. Police discovered that other girls had done the same, and they too received phone calls from the same man, with the same story, help picking out a gift for their mothers. The only difference: Amy was the only one who accepted the invitation. Authorities developed a profile of the suspect. A white male, between 30 and 40 years old, well-spoken, capable of gaining a child's trust over the phone. The physical description given by witnesses was vague, ordinary clothing, brown hair, average height, no distinctive features. In other words, he could have been anyone. That was the first major obstacle. As days turned into weeks, investigators followed dozens of leads, but all of them ended in dead ends. Anonymous letters arrived, informants called in, suspects were questioned, but no concrete evidence was found. The once peaceful town now lived under constant tension. Parents began picking their kids up from school. Children no longer walked alone. Something had changed forever. Meanwhile, the Mihaljevic family suffered in silence. Amy's mother appeared on television multiple times, pleading for her daughter to come home, but no response ever came. And then something happened, something that would change the course of the investigation. On February 8, 1994, then 3 months after the disappearance, a farm worker traveling along an isolated road in Ashland County, Ohio, noticed something unusual in the middle of an open field near County Road 1181. As he got closer, he saw what appeared to be children's belongings scattered randomly, partially covered by leaves and natural debris. The scene was quickly secured by police, and the FBI was notified. The location was nearly 50 miles from Bay Village. With great care, investigators examined the items found. Among them were belongings that had once belonged to Amy: her green and white striped jacket, a belt, a sneaker. A handmade beaded bracelet, which she had crafted herself, was also identified by her mother. There was no longer any doubt. This discovery confirmed their worst fears. The forensic analysis of the scene raised more questions than answers. The vegetation and the position of the items suggested they had been there for months, likely since October. Shortly after the disappearance, Yet, no one had seen anything during all that time. The area was remote and rarely visited. It appeared the person responsible had chosen the location deliberately isolated, discreet, and far from the original search zones. What also stood out to investigators was that some of Amy's personal belongings were never found. Her school backpack, a notebook, her bicycle, and a horse-shaped earring. These items will remain missing to this day, leading investigators to believe the person responsible kept them, possibly because they held clues. During the evidence collection, golden carpet fibers and strands of hair were found clinging to the objects. These elements would become important over the years, especially with advances in forensic technology. However, in 1990, the tools available were limited. The FBI began to consider a new factor. The perpetrator may have transported Amy in a vehicle with a light-colored carpet interior, which supported the theory that she was calmly approached and taken without resistance. Meanwhile, the community remained heartbroken, and the sense of insecurity continued to grow. The town was no longer the same, and now, the investigation was taking a new turn. If the person responsible was trying to erase evidence, what else might they have done? The lingering question was, did he act alone, or did others know what had happened to Amy? With the discovery of Amy's belongings in Ashland County, the investigation shifted tone. The case, already involving dozens of FBI agents, began focusing on potential suspects with ties to the rural area where the items were found. The analysis of the scene suggested that whoever had been there either knew the area well or felt safe enough to use it as a final destination. Investigators then started cross-referencing information between Bay Village and Ashland. By this point, police had already interviewed more than 18,000 people. That's right, 18,000 interviews, ranging from teachers, neighbors, and former employees of local companies to visitors of the Science Center. Despite the massive effort, no confession was ever obtained, and physical evidence remained scarce. Despite occasional breakthroughs, the overall feeling was one of frustration. Leads were going cold, evidence was fading with time, and the public began to fear that the case might never be solved. By this point, Amy's name was known across the country. TV shows dedicated entire episodes to her disappearance, and the case was even discussed in classrooms as a cautionary tale. But no new lead ever truly changed the course of the investigation. What do you think really happened to Amy? Do you believe the person responsible was someone close to the family or a well-prepared stranger? Share your theory in the comments below. Over the year following the discovery of Amy's belongings, the case seemed to hit a standstill. But in 1991, a new line of investigation sparked renewed hope. FBI agents returned to the Science Center, where Amy had signed the visitor log and began systematically investigating all the children who had signed the book in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. That's when a shocking connection emerged. At least figures reported receiving phone calls similar to the one Amy had received. The same mysterious man, the same story he claimed to work with their mothers, knew their names, and asked for help picking out a gift. Some girls said he was kind, polite, and seemed trustworthy, but none of them ever met with him. From what investigators could tell, Amy was the only one who fell for the plan. These accounts shifted the focus of the investigation. The case was no longer seen as an isolated incident. There was a clear pattern, and it was possible the perpetrator had been testing out different potential victims. This strongly supported the theory of premeditation. He hadn't acted on impulse. He had a plan, a target, and a method. The analysis of the phone call suggested that the man had information that was far too specific to be just a stranger. He knew mothers' names, their workplaces, phone numbers. Hello? The most likely hypothesis is that he obtained this information from some kind of list or even from publicly accessible documents like school records or community event sign-up sheets. In other words, he may not have known Amy personally, but he had done his research. Another point that caught investigators' attention was the precision with which he chose the meeting location, Bay Square Shopping Center, around the exact time when Amy would be alone right after school. This indicated that he had been watching his targets before making a move, which was a chilling detail. Despite this important discovery, the investigation continued to face major obstacles. Many of the recordings and phone records from that time had been lost or had never existed at all. Witnesses were re-interviewed, but time had begun to erase critical memories. Frustration was also mounting within the FBI team. In internal meetings, some agents even questioned whether the case would ever be solved. But then, amid this standstill, a new technology began to emerge, and it just might hold the key to uncovering what really happened to Amy. The analysis of the phone call suggested that the man had information that was far too specific to be just a stranger. He knew mothers' names, their workplaces, phone numbers. Hello? The most likely hypothesis is that he obtained this information from some kind of list or even from publicly accessible documents like school records or community event sign-up sheets. In other words, he may not have known Amy personally, but he had done his research. Another point that caught investigators' attention was the precision with which he chose the meeting location Bay Square shopping center around the exact time when Amy would be alone right after school. This indicated that he had been watching his targets before making a move, which was a chilling detail. Despite this important discovery, the investigation continued to face major obstacles. Many of the recordings and phone records from that time had been lost or had never existed at all. Witnesses were re-interviewed, but time had begun to erase critical memories. Frustration was also mounting within the FBI team. In internal meetings, some agents even questioned whether the case would ever be solved. But then, amid this standstill, a new technology began to emerge and it just might hold the key to uncovering what really happened to Amy. It was already the early 2000s when Amy Mihaljevic's case began to regain momentum with the arrival of new forensic analysis techniques. Samples that had been collected at the time, hair strands, fibers, fabric fragments were preserved and could now be examined with more precise equipment. The FBI revisited all the material gathered in 1989 and 1990, hoping that the answers had been hidden there from the start. One of the most significant discoveries was the confirmation of golden carpet fibers found on Amy's belongings. Analysts were able to determine that those fibers belonged to a specific type of automotive carpet, used in older car models, common between the 1970s and 1980s. This information helped narrow down the number of compatible vehicles, providing a valuable clue about the possible transportation used by the perpetrator. Additionally, hair strands that did not belong to Amy were sent for DNA analysis. Even without an immediate match, this material was entered into national databases. The hope was that, as years passed, some match might emerge perhaps through a distant relative, as had happened in other cases solved through genetic genealogy. Meanwhile, police began re-interviewing old suspects, including jr.rooh, now retired and living quietly in another state. He was approached by agents looking for inconsistencies in his previous statements. During questioning, he remained calm and denied any involvement, but one detail caught attention. According to witnesses, Runkle owned a car with the type of carpet that could match the fibers found. Still, there was not enough direct evidence to bring them to trial. Another curious detail came from a woman who said she saw, on the day of the disappearance, a man with specific features near the mall. The police created a composite sketch based on her description. The sketch, released years later, was compared with photos of suspects, but still no conclusive identification was made. Amid all this, investigators also began considering the possibility that the case was connected to other similar disappearances in neighboring states. Theories arose that there might be a broader pattern, but no solid evidence directly linked Amy to those other cases. Time passed, technology evolved, but the mystery remained without a definitive answer. With every new lead, a new dead end appeared. Still, the determination not to let the case fall into oblivion kept hope alive. If you were one of the investigators, what would you do with the current clues? Do you believe the perpetrator is among the old suspects? Share your opinion in the comments. In 2005, more than 15 years after Amy's disappearance, a surprising new element came into the investigators' hands. An anonymous letter. The sender claimed to know details about the case that had never been publicly disclosed. The letter mentioned the exact description of Amy's clothes, the time of the meeting, and the name of an alleged family acquaintance. Despite vague content in some parts, there was information that caught the agent's attention due to its accuracy. The origin of the letter was traced to a public mailbox, but no fingerprints were found. Handwriting analysis also did not lead to an identification. However, this new development reignited an old theory: the involvement of someone with internal access to information from the school or the family circle. From there, investigators revisited the hypothesis that the man who called Amy had privileged knowledge. He not only knew her mother's name, but also where she worked, her routine, and the best time to approach Amy. This raised the possibility that the author had access to internal records. Perhaps someone who worked at the school, in a community service, or even at the science center where Amy had left her name. The S1, a previously little examined figure, began to receive closer scrutiny. A former administrative employee of Amy's school, who had worked there briefly that year and left a few months after the case surfaced. According to records, he was responsible for handling school files and phone calls. There were no complaints against him, but his sudden departure and the fact that he did not cooperate with investigators at the time drew attention. Attempts to locate him proved difficult. He had moved out of state, changed jobs several times, and was living quietly. When finally found in 2007, he claimed not to remember details from that period and denied any involvement. His DNA was collected and compared with the case samples but showed no match. This line of investigation, however, strengthened the idea that the perpetrator had prior access to private information and may not have acted alone. There was even the hypothesis that two people were involved, one responsible for the phone contact and another for the later part of the plan. Meanwhile, Amy's case had already become one of the most emblematic unsolved cases in the United States. In Bay Village, signs and murals continued to display her photo with the words, "Someone knows. Someone saw. Someone can speak." In 2013, a wave of hope swept through the FBI corridors when a breakthrough in mitochondrial DNA testing allowed the reanalysis of the hair strands collected from Amy's belongings. With the support of a team of forensic genealogists, investigators began constructing a reverse family tree from the unidentified DNA, a painstaking process that would take months. During this process, a name emerged with a high genetic match. He was a man who had lived near Bay Village at the time of the disappearance and, according to records, frequented the same places as Amy and her family. He had worked at a company located near the mall where she was last seen. The agent's expectations grew when located the Monday night in involvement. However, he agreed to cooperate, voluntarily provided his DNA sample, and to everyone's frustration, the result was inconclusive. He could have been a distant relative of the person who actually had contact with Amy, or, according to another theory, someone who had indirect contact with her belongings for unknown reasons. Forensic genealogy went back to square one, trying to trace closer genetic connections, but the case always seemed to slip through their fingers at the last moment. Meanwhile, in 2016, new testimony reached the detectives. A woman claimed that in 1989, shortly after Amy's disappearance, she saw a man parked in an isolated area near a rural field not far from where Amy's belongings had been found. He appeared nervous, looking around, and seemed to be hiding something in the trunk. The woman noted part of the car's license plate, but never thought to report it to the police until she saw a documentary about the case nearly 3 decades later. The police investigated the partial plate number and managed to narrow the search to about 100 possible vehicles registered in Ohio at the time. One by one, the owners were located and interviewed. One stood out. The man had a history of suspicious approaches to minors and had been interrogated in the past but was released due to lack of evidence. Again, DNA was collected and again, no match. The case seemed to conspire against any clear resolution. With every clue, every breakthrough, new questions arose. Even with so much technology available, the final piece to complete this puzzle was still missing. In 2019, 30 years after Amy Mihaljevic's disappearance, the FBI made a new public appeal to the community. They released updated images of the girl's belongings, photos of the scene, and asked for help to solve what was already considered one of the most disturbing cases in the United States. Special Agent John Holloway, now leading the investigation, said in an interview, "Someone out there knows the truth, and we still hope that person will come forward." This new appeal yielded unexpected results. 2 women contacted the department saying they had also received mysterious phone calls in 1989, just days before Amy vanished. Both described the same approach. A man with a calm voice who claimed to be working with their mothers and asked for help choosing a surprise gift. The 2 girls felt uncomfortable and told their parents, who at the time didn't take it very seriously. With these accounts, a new theory emerged. The perpetrator had made several attempts until he managed to track someone vulnerable. Amy wasn't the only target, but unfortunately, the only one who answered the call. When re-examining old statements, the investigative team noticed another point of concern. The suspect knew exactly where and when to find Amy alone. This required prior surveillance and possibly knowledge of her school route or family routine. Based on this digital simulation was created of Amy's steps at the time she left school, her walk to the mall, waiting time, and the possible approach of the man. The reconstruction showed that the perpetrator would have needed to act with extreme speed and precision, suggesting he was already familiar with the location and had prepared everything in advance. The only witness who saw Amy with a man described an individual with common features, light hair and average height. The sketch made from this account was reviewed using current technology and a new composite sketch was created. Still, no matches have been found in any databases to this day. Even with time passing, authorities keep the case active. In Bay Village, Amy's name is remembered in memorials and school events, and the mystery remains. Who was the man behind the phone call? Why her? And how did he vanish without a trace? We've reached 2025, almost 36 years after Amy Mihaljevic's disappearance and tragic end. The case that shook Ohio and the United States remains officially unsolved. A puzzle that challenges the police, the justice system, and the local community. Over the decades, technologies have evolved. Suspects were interrogated, evidence analyzed and reanalyzed, witnesses consulted, but nothing conclusive has emerged. The mystery of who the man was that deceived Amy, what really happened that day, and why he was never identified remains intact. Amy is not just a sad memory for her family and friends, but a symbol of an unrelenting search for answers that still echoes in Bay Village. Authorities keep the case active, revisiting any leads that may arise, but time is also working against them. The advanced age of those involved, the loss of witnesses, and the deterioration of physical evidence make a resolution increasingly difficult. The local community holds annual events to keep Amy's memory alive and raise awareness about the importance of child safety, trying to turn pain into consciousness. But there is one question that won't go away. How can a case with so many clues, investigations, and technological advances still remain without a definitive resolution? Is the person responsible still nearby, watching from afar, or did they leave behind a secret that can never be uncovered? For many, the end of the case marks the beginning of questions that challenge logic and justice, a mystery that continues to unsettle and may never be fully explained. What do you think really happened to Amy Mihaljevic? Share your theory in the comments below. If you enjoyed the story, like and subscribe for more mysteries like this. Until next time, take care.